There are moments in life when a single sentence, spoken by a complete stranger, can split your world in two. For her, it happened on an ordinary afternoon, the kind where nothing feels dangerous, nothing feels out of place. She was just running errands, mind wandering, heart calm. And then, a man she had never seen before stepped into her path. His eyes carried a strange mix of urgency and regret, like someone fighting against time. Or guilt. He said he knew her husband, but what came next didn't just raise questions. It shattered everything she thought she understood about love, trust, and the quiet life she believed she was living, because this stranger wasn't warning her about a mistake. He was warning her about a secret life her husband had buried so deep, she was never meant to uncover it, and yet, here it was, unfolding in front of her. It began on one of those deceptively peaceful afternoons, the kind where the world feels soft, predictable, and harmless. She remembered the sky being unusually clear, a gentle blue that made everything look calmer than it truly was. She was walking out of a small cafe, iced coffee in hand, when she noticed a man lingering near the corner of the street. He wasn't looking at his phone, or a map, or even the passing cars. He was watching her. Not in a threatening way, more like someone wrestling with a decision he wasn't sure he had the right to make. And as she approached, he stepped forward with a hesitant urgency, calling her name softly. As if he wasn't supposed to know it at all. There was something unsettling in the way his voice trembled, not from fear but from the weight of what he was about to say. He told her he knew her husband, but not from work or a casual encounter. "I shouldn't be here," he whispered, glancing over his shoulder as if shadows might be listening. "But you deserve to know the truth." Her pulse tightened instantly, that instinctive tightening of the chest that comes when danger hasn't shown its face yet, but you can feel it approaching. She tried to brush it off, to laugh politely, to assert that her husband didn't keep secrets. Their marriage wasn't perfect, but it was familiar, safe, predictable. But the stranger's eyes held something that froze her, pity. And pity never comes before good news. He didn't reveal everything at once. Instead, he spoke in fragmented hints, like a man who had rehearsed this moment 100 times, but still didn't know how to break someone's world gently. He told her her husband wasn't the man she thought he was, that there were parts of his life she had never seen, and was never supposed to. Not dangerous, the stranger clarified, not in the way she might fear, but deeply, painfully deceptive. A double existence built quietly behind her back. She wanted to demand proof, to dismiss him as some confused or malicious stranger. Yet every instinct told her his fear was real, and real fear almost always comes from truth. And when he finally murmured, he lied to protect something, or someone, you don't know about. Her breath left her body like a door slamming shut. Before she could ask a single question, he stepped away, leaving her with a final warning that clung to her skin like frost. Look closer. The signs are already there. And with that he disappeared into the afternoon crowd, swallowed by sunlight and anonymity. She stood frozen on the sidewalk, heart spiraling between disbelief and dread, because as much as she wanted to dismiss him, a tiny voice inside her whispered that he wasn't wrong. Something had felt different lately. The late nights, the unexplained tension, the quiet glances her husband thought she didn't notice. And now, for the first time, she wondered if the life she had been living was only half of the story, and whether she was ready to learn the rest. That night, she tried to forget the stranger's warning, convincing herself it was nothing more than a bizarre encounter with an unstable man, but denial is a fragile thing. It only takes a faint tap for it to shatter. As she sat across from her husband at dinner, the same table, the same routine, the same easy smile he always offered her, she found herself studying him with new eyes. There was something about the way he avoided her gaze for just a beat too long, or how he flinched slightly when she asked about his day. These were details she'd never noticed before, or perhaps never allowed herself to notice. Suddenly, every small pause, every forced laugh, every vague explanation felt like a loose thread waiting to be pulled. In the following days, a pattern emerged, not dramatic enough to scream danger, but subtle enough to whisper doubt. He became more protective of his phone, turning the screen away when notifications appeared, slipping into the hallway to take calls that he claimed were just work. He left earlier in the mornings, returned later at night, and always seemed just a little distracted. She told herself that people go through phases, that stress makes anyone act strangely. But deep inside, the stranger's voice echoed like a warning siren she couldn't turn off. "Look closer," he'd said. And now, no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't unsee the cracks forming along the edges of her once steady world. She began replaying past moments, times when his explanations didn't fully add up but seemed harmless at the time. The sudden business trip that never appeared on any calendar. The forgotten anniversary he brushed off as exhaustion. The night he returned home, smelling faintly of a perfume that wasn't hers. Something floral and unfamiliar, which he blamed on a colleague's embrace. These memories resurfaced like old photographs she had ignored, each holding a piece of a puzzle she never realized she was meant to solve. And for the first time, she wondered whether her trust had been misplaced, or whether she had simply chosen not to see the truth. Still, despite the growing evidence, a part of her clung desperately to the hope that she was wrong, that the stranger was lying, or mistaken, or projecting his own bitterness onto her husband. Love does that. It makes us defend the people who hurt us, even when the truth is right in front of us. But by the end of the week, something shifted. As she watched her husband retreat into yet another late-night meeting, a cold certainty settled in her chest. Whatever he was hiding, it wasn't small, it wasn't harmless, and it wasn't going away. The cracks weren't cracks anymore. They were fractures, and they were spreading faster than she could hold them together. It started with a feeling, that restless, intuitive tug in her chest, pushing her to look where she never thought to look before. One quiet morning, while her husband showered, she noticed his briefcase left slightly open on the bed. It wasn't unusual for him to forget things in a rush, but something about the loosened latch felt like an invitation she hadn't been brave enough to accept until now. Her hands trembled as she lifted the flap, half expecting nothing, half terrified of finding something she couldn't explain away. Inside, everything seemed normal at first: papers, receipts, work files. Until she found a small folded envelope tucked deep beneath the folders. Her name wasn't on it. In fact, no name was, but the handwriting inside wasn't his. She didn't open the letter immediately. Instead, she spent the entire day feeling its weight in her pocket like a heartbeat that didn't belong to her. It wasn't just the letter. It was everything around it. A strange key she didn't recognize. A hotel loyalty card from a place he had never mentioned staying. A receipt for a dinner for two dated on a night he claimed to be stuck at the office. One clue could be a misunderstanding. Two could be coincidence, but 3, 4. They formed a trail, uneven, unsettling, but undeniably real. And each piece pulled her further from the life she thought she understood, and deeper into a story she hadn't agreed to be part of. That evening, when he kissed her cheek as if nothing were wrong, her stomach twisted with a mix of anger and fear. How long had he been living this double life while pretending everything was normal? She excused herself, locked the bathroom door, and finally opened the letter. Her breath caught as she scanned the message, not intimate, not romantic, but secretive, urgent. It referenced a meeting he was supposed to attend within the week, using a tone that suggested instructions, not affection. It was enough to confirm one thing: whoever wrote this wasn't someone from his job. This wasn't business. This was personal. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, feeling the world tilt beneath her feet. She wasn't imagining things. She wasn't overthinking. The hidden trail was real, and it was leading her somewhere she wasn't prepared to go. But the stranger's warning echoed louder now, merging with her own unease. The signs are already there. He had been right. She didn't know her husband's full life. Not even close. And as she stood there gripping the letter, she realized she had a choice: step back and pretend nothing was happening, or follow the trail into the truth, no matter how painful it might be. The next few days felt like walking through a house she'd lived in for years, only to suddenly discover hidden rooms behind familiar walls. With every clue she uncovered, her husband began to look less like the man she married and more like a stranger wearing his face. She watched him more closely now, the careful way he carried his phone with him everywhere, the sudden change in his driving routes, the unexplained tension in his expressions when he thought she wasn't looking. It wasn't just stress. It wasn't work. It was the behavior of someone juggling two worlds and praying they never collided. And she couldn't shake the growing certainty that the collision was closer than he realized. Determined to find real answers, she followed the address mentioned in the mysterious letter. It led her to a quiet neighborhood across town, a place she had no reason to ever visit. The house wasn't remarkable, small, neat, ordinary, but the sight of her husband's car parked discreetly around the corner made her heart thunder against her ribs. She watched from a distance as he walked up the driveway with the ease of someone who had been there countless times. He didn't knock. He used the strange key she found in his briefcase. The door opened, and a silhouette greeted him, not intimate, not welcoming, but familiar. He stepped inside as if he belonged there. She didn't dare move closer. She didn't need to. The truth was unfolding right in front of her, sharper and colder than she expected. Her husband didn't just have secrets. He had an entire life she had never been allowed to see. A life with routines, obligations, and relationships she wasn't part of. As she sat in her car, fingers clenched around the steering wheel, she felt her world split in two. The life she thought she had, and the one she was watching from the shadows. Everything the stranger had warned her about was happening right here, and this time there was no denying it. She waited until he left before approaching the house, her steps slow, deliberate, hesitant. Through the window she noticed framed photographs, faces she didn't recognize, and paperwork on the table that bore her husband's handwriting alongside signatures she'd never seen before. This wasn't a temporary escape or a one-time mistake. This was a second identity he had carefully built and protected. And as she stood there trembling, understanding the magnitude of his lies, one chilling question settled into her mind. If this was the life he hid, what else was he capable of hiding? She thought she was ready for answers, but nothing prepares you for the moment the person who shattered your reality returns, carrying even heavier truths. It happened late one evening, after she spent hours circling the revelations she had witnessed at that hidden house. She was sitting in her car outside a grocery store, too lost in thought to actually go inside, when a quiet knock tapped against her window. She startled, heart racing, and there he was again, the same stranger who had warned her days earlier. Only this time he didn't look conflicted. He looked certain and exhausted, as if he'd finally accepted that keeping silent was no longer an option. She hesitated before opening the door, torn between fear and a desperate need for clarity. He slid into the passenger seat without waiting for permission, not out of arrogance but urgency, like a man who knew time was running out. "You saw it, didn't you?" he asked softly. She froze. How could he know? He continued before she could respond, explaining that the second house, the unfamiliar key, the hidden correspondence. None of it was new to him. He had known about her husband's secret life for years. He had watched the deception grow, watched the consequences tighten, watched the danger creep closer. And he had truly tried, to intervene before it reached her. His voice cracked as he revealed his connection. He wasn't a stalker or an enemy. He was someone who once trusted her husband too, someone who had been part of that secret life before escaping it. He wasn't always like this, the stranger confessed. But one lie becomes two become 10. Eventually, a man forgets which version of himself is the real one. He warned her that the hidden house was only the surface of a much larger truth. There were consequences attached to her husband's double life, debts, promises, unfinished threads that could unravel dangerously now that she was discovering them. "If he knows you've found out," he whispered, "he won't be the only one who panics." Her breath tightened at his words, every instinct screaming that she was stepping into a world she never belonged to. But the stranger wasn't there to frighten her. He was there because he owed her the truth. He handed her an envelope, thicker than the first, filled with documents, receipts, photos, and pieces of a life she didn't recognize. "You deserve answers," he murmured, "even if they break you first." And then, as quickly as he arrived, he stepped out of the car and disappeared into the night, leaving her alone with the weight of everything hidden and everything still to come. For the first time, she realized the mystery wasn't just about her husband's lies. It was about the danger those lies were dragging straight toward her. The envelope sat on her kitchen table like a ticking clock. She didn't open it right away, not because she lacked courage, but because she sensed that doing so would mark a point of no return. For hours, she walked around it, glancing at it from different angles, as though the secrets inside might somehow soften if she waited long enough. When she finally tore it open, the documents spilled out in a silent avalanche of hidden history. Bank statements under a name she didn't recognize. Rental agreements for storage units she had never heard of. Credit accounts opened years before she met him. It wasn't just a double life. It was a layered life, built carefully, deliberately, far beyond anything she had imagined. Among the papers were photographs, grainy, hurried shots of her husband in unfamiliar places, meeting people she didn't know. Some images showed him exchanging envelopes. Others captured him entering the very house she had followed him to. But one photo froze her completely. Her husband standing with a woman she had never seen, their expressions serious, not intimate, but undeniably connected. The woman appeared in several documents as well, signatures, addresses, transactions linking her repeatedly to him. She felt her stomach twist with betrayal, but this wasn't the betrayal of an affair. It was something far more complex. This woman wasn't a romantic partner. She was a partner in something else. Her mind raced through possibilities: illegal dealings, hidden debts, unfinished obligations, but none of them felt big enough to justify the elaborate secrecy. She flipped through a set of receipts and discovered payments made in cash to an organization with a vague, almost anonymous name. The days aligned suspiciously with nights he claimed to be working late. A pattern emerged, unsettling and unmistakable. Her husband had ties to something larger, something shadowed, something he'd been entangled in long before he married her. And suddenly the stranger's warning echoed with frightening clarity. He wasn't protecting himself. He was protecting you from what he carries. By the time she reached the bottom of the envelope, she felt the room spinning. Every assumption she had held about her husband, his past, his values, the man she believed she had built a life with, crumbled under the weight of this new truth. He hadn't simply lied. He had constructed an entire facade to shield her from the darker network he was bound to. But shielding her required deception, and deception had now grown into danger. She looked at the pile of papers, realizing they weren't just clues, they were warnings. She wasn't standing at the edge of a mystery anymore. She was standing in the middle of one, and the ground beneath her was beginning to move. She realized that if she wanted answers, she had to stop looking at the man he had become and start looking at the man he used to be. The documents from the envelope gave her fragments, addresses, dates, names, but no complete picture. So she started piecing together his past one thread at a time. Old directories, public records, archived employment logs. What she found wasn't criminal, but it was deeply unsettling. Her husband had once lived under a different name, in a different city, with a life so far removed from the one he shared with her that it almost felt fictional. And yet, it was real. The career he always claimed to have built from scratch wasn't his starting point. It was his second attempt, his reinvention. A clean slate he created after walking away from something or someone. She traced one address from his past and found herself standing before a modest apartment building weathered by time. She didn't expect anyone to remember him. It had been years, but when she showed a photo to the elderly landlord, the recognition was instant. "Ah, him," the man muttered, kept to himself, always watching the door, always waiting for something. The words chilled her. The landlord went on, describing how her husband once shared the apartment with the same woman from the documents, the woman who kept appearing beside him in those photographs. They weren't lovers, he clarified. They were involved in something complicated. Always whispering, always planning. But one day he vanished without a goodbye. She left a week later, and suddenly the puzzle didn't feel like a puzzle, it felt like a past running toward her faster than she could escape. Back home, she searched deeper and eventually uncovered a series of old news articles tied to her husband's former alias. Nothing major, but enough to unsettle her completely. The articles referenced financial disputes, a failed business venture, and an investigation into a private group he was associated with, an organization whose name matched the vague title on the receipts she found earlier. It wasn't illegal, but it wasn't harmless either. This group operated in a gray area, promising protection, information, and opportunities. At a cost. When she read the final line of one article, members who leave the organization often do so abruptly, citing fear or unresolved obligations, she felt her stomach drop. Her husband hadn't just stepped away. He had run. The past was no longer a shadow behind him. It was a presence pressing against her door. Every lie he told her wasn't just about deception, it was about survival. And the stranger's urgency now made sense. Her husband had spent years building a new life, a safer identity, a version of himself that looked stable and trustworthy. But the past he abandoned hadn't abandoned him. And now, as she stood in the quiet of her home surrounded by documents, photos, and truths she never asked for, she understood a devastating reality. Whatever he had been part of, whatever he had escaped, it wasn't finished with him. And because she was part of his world, it wasn't finished with her either. The rupture didn't happen in a single moment. It unfolded like a slow-moving storm, gathering force from everything she had learned until the weight became impossible to hold. The night she confronted him began quietly, almost deceptively calm. He walked into the house with his usual half-tired smile, expecting the same routine, the same predictable rhythm of their evenings. But she was standing in the living room waiting for him, the documents spread across the coffee table like evidence in a trial. The instant he saw them, his expression changed, not shock, not confusion, but resignation. As if he had been bracing for this day to arrive. As if he always knew the truth would eventually break through the walls he built. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She simply asked, "Who are you?" And that single question, stripped of anger and filled with raw disbelief, cut deeper than any accusation. He sank onto the couch, burying his face in his hands, and for the first time she saw him not as the man she married, but as someone exhausted by years of running. He admitted to the second identity. He admitted to the organization. He admitted to leaving them abruptly, thinking he could escape the obligations he'd once willingly embraced. "I wanted a normal life," he whispered. "With you I finally had one. And I didn't know how to tell you without losing everything." His voice shook, not with fear of the past, but fear of losing her. But the collapse wasn't emotional alone. It was practical, tangible, dangerous. While they spoke, his phone buzzed repeatedly, unknown numbers, encrypted messages, warnings masked as reminders. She watched his facade crumble as he explained that his past associates had resurfaced, tracking his movements, growing impatient with his unfinished commitments. The stranger, he admitted, had once been part of the same group. A friend turned witness. A warning he refused to listen to until it was too late. "They're coming back into my life," he confessed, voice hoarse. "And I don't know how to stop them anymore." The room felt smaller with every word, the air thicker with every revelation. By the time he finished speaking, it felt as though the walls around them had shifted, no longer a home, but the fragile shell of a life built on borrowed time. She wasn't angry anymore. She was terrified. Terrified for him. Terrified for herself. Terrified of the invisible world that had been circling them long before she realized they had existed. When he reached for her hand, she pulled away, not out of punishment, but because she needed space to breathe in a reality that suddenly felt foreign. And as he quietly said, "I only wanted to protect you," she understood the cruel irony of it all. His lies were meant to shield her, but the truth was what finally shattered their lives apart. The house felt different the next morning, as if the walls themselves knew the truth now, breathing heavier with the weight of everything that had been exposed. She moved through the rooms like a guest in her own life, noticing details she had ignored before: the drawer he always kept locked, the sudden trips he claimed were unavoidable, the distant expression he wore during quiet evenings. Each memory struck her like a small betrayal, accumulating until the air around her felt too dense to breathe. Sleep had barely touched her, but exhaustion wasn't the enemy, clarity was. For the first time, she saw her marriage not as a partnership, but as a beautiful illusion crafted on top of a fault line that had finally cracked open. He tried to speak to her, tried to explain again, but every word felt like another thread unraveling. He apologized, not in the defensive, rehearsed way she expected, but in a broken, unguarded voice that revealed a man carrying years of guilt. He admitted he should have told her the truth from the beginning, that maybe she would have run, but at least she would have run knowing who he really was. Now, she couldn't trust anything he said, not even the pieces that sounded sincere. "I was trying to protect you," he repeated, but she didn't know if protection built on lies could ever be considered love. She listened, but her heart stayed quiet, too bruised to reach for him, too wounded to forgive. Outside their home, the consequences grew louder. The stranger's warnings became reality. People were watching them. Cars slowing near their street. Anonymous calls that clicked off the moment she answered. Her husband grew increasingly agitated, pacing the house, checking the locks, whispering to someone late at night in hushed tones he thought she couldn't hear. Fear settled between them like a third presence, shaping their every move. The life they once built together, Sunday mornings, shared laughter, plans for the future, felt impossibly distant now, replaced by something darker and colder. She wasn't just grieving her marriage. She was grieving the version of herself that once believed she was safe. Yet amid the chaos, a strange calm began forming inside her. Not acceptance, not peace, but strength. Betrayal does that. It burns everything you were so you can see everything you must become. She realized she couldn't depend on him to fix what he had broken. She couldn't wait for explanations or promises that things would get better. She had to protect herself now, even if it meant stepping away from the man whose lies had pulled her into this dangerous orbit. Standing alone in their living room, she understood something profound. Sometimes the aftermath is not about what you've lost, but about what you finally see clearly. And what she saw now was a future she would have to rebuild without the illusion of who she thought he was. In the weeks that followed, life took on a strange, quiet stillness, the kind that settles after a storm rips through everything familiar. She moved out of their home first, not out of anger but necessity. Space had become survival. She found a small apartment across town, a place with blank walls and clean air, untouched by secrets or half-truths. For the first time in years, she woke up without the weight of someone else's story resting on her chest. There were moments she missed him, not the man he truly was, but the man she thought she had married. Grief and relief lived side by side inside her, two emotions she learned didn't cancel each other out. Instead, they taught her that healing rarely comes in a straight line. Her husband tried contacting her in the beginning. Long messages, apologies, explanations she didn't ask for. He said he understood why she left, but he still hoped she'd come back when things settled. But things didn't settle, they unraveled. The organization he'd once been tied to resurfaced fully, pulling him into the consequences he'd been running from. For the first time, she saw him clearly, not as a villain or a liar, but as a deeply flawed man trying to hold together a life built on cracks. She couldn't save him from those consequences. She couldn't stand in front of the storm again. Loving someone, she realized, doesn't mean you must drown with them. Slowly she rebuilt. She returned to old hobbies she'd abandoned. Reconnected with friends she hadn't realized she'd drifted from. For the first time, she started choosing things just for herself. New routines, new places, new people who entered her life without shadows attached to them. She attended therapy, not because she felt broken, but because she deserved to understand her story from her own perspective. The stranger who warned her never appeared again, and in a way she was grateful. His purpose had been fulfilled. He showed her a truth she needed to see, a truth that hurt, but ultimately freed her. Some people enter our lives not to stay, but to redirect us before we walk too far into darkness. One quiet morning, sitting by the window of her new home, she realized something profound. She had survived. Not just the betrayal, not just the lies, not just the fear, but the shattering of the life she once clung to. She wasn't the same woman who walked out of that cafe weeks ago. She was stronger, more aware, more unwilling to let someone else's secrets shape her world. The past would always be part of her story, but it no longer defined her. As the sunlight warmed her face, she understood that the stranger hadn't just warned her about her husband's mistake. He had given her a chance to reclaim her own life. And she had taken it.